Good day, Class 9. Open your political science text books to page 41. It's chapter 3, Constitutional Design. In the previous chapter, we noted that in a democracy, the rulers are not free to do what they feel like. In other words, they just can't run the government according to their own free will. They have to follow certain basic rules. Same with the citizens. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, of the country. It determines the rights of citizens, the powers of the government, and how the government should function. In this chapter, we ask some basic questions like, why do we need a constitution? How are constitutions drawn up? Who designs them and in what way? We begin the chapter by looking at what happened in South Africa and how the citizens went about the task of designing their constitution. Later we turn to how the Indian constitution was made and its importance for citizens and the government. Now we will deal with South Africa. Nelson Mandela was tried for treason by the white South African government. What is treason? Treason is betrayal of one's nation or government. He and 7 other leaders were sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964. Why? For daring to oppose the racist regime, apartheid. What is apartheid? It was the name of a system of racial discrimination that was unique to South Africa. It was related to the color of skin, black and white. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the trading companies from Europe occupied South Africa with arms and force, just like they did in India. But what was the difference between the Europeans in South Africa and the Europeans that came to India? The Europeans in South Africa settled in South Africa and became the local rulers. But in India, they just came to rule and trade, to take away the wealth of India, as you have read earlier. The system of apartheid divided the people and labeled them on the basis of their skin color. The natives of Africa are black and made up 75% of the population. So, there were blacks and whites, that is, the Europeans. Besides, there were people of mixed races called colored. And there were people who migrated from India. The white rulers treated all non-whites as inferiors. These non-whites had no voting rights. The apartheid system was particularly oppressive for the blacks. In what way? We shall see below. First, they were forbidden from living in white areas. 2. They could only work in white areas if they had a permit. Trains, buses, taxis, hotels, hospitals, schools, colleges, cinema halls, beaches, and even public toilets were all separated for the whites and blacks. This total separation is called segregation. Please make a note. Fourth, the blacks could not visit the churches where the whites worshipped. Blacks could not form associations or protest against the terrible treatment. This terrible treatment in their own country became unbearable. Since 1950, the blacks, colored, and Indians fought against the whites. They began protest marches and strikes. The African National Congress was the driving force that led the struggle against the policies of segregation. They were joined by workers' unions, communists, and many sensitive whites to oppose apartheid. Several countries denounced apartheid, but the white racist government continued to detain, torture, and kill thousands of blacks and colored people. We move on towards a new constitution. Protests and struggles against the white government increased. The government realized that they could not keep the blacks under their rule by repression. So, they changed its policies. What changes were made? Discriminatory laws were repealed. Ban on political parties and restrictions on media were lifted. And after 28 years in prison, Nelson Mandela walked out as a free man. On 26 April 1994, the new national flag of the Republic of South Africa was unfurled. It was the marking of a newly born democracy in the world. The apartheid government came to an end and a multiracial government was formed. Why was the African Constitution the finest constitution the world has ever had? The black leaders appealed to the fellow blacks to forgive the whites for the wrong they had committed. They urged them to build a new Africa based on equality of all races, and men and women on democratic values, social justice, and human rights. It was most amazing to see the whites. These were the people who brutally killed the blacks. And the blacks who led the freedom struggle sitting together to draw up a common constitution for something rather spectacular. One side you had the whites who brutally killed blacks and coloreds and Indians, who protested against the racist regime. And on the other side you had the blacks who were treated mercilessly, who were repressed mercilessly, then went on to protest against the racist government. Now both sat face to face to draw up a common constitution. That is the first wonderful thing that ever happened. The Constitution gave to its citizens the most extensive rights available in any country. Third, they decided that in the search for a solution to a problem, nobody should be excluded. No one should be treated as a demon. Everyone should be a part of the solution. The South African government was a democratic government, inspired by the South African Constitution. The Democrats all over the world praised the South African Constitution. It is now seen as a model of democracy. It was the determination of the people of South Africa to work together, to transform bitter experiences into the binding glues of a rainbow nation. Please note, South Africa is also called the Rainbow Nation. We move on to why do we need a constitution? The best example of why we need a constitution is the South African example. The oppressor and oppressed were planning to live together as equals. Though it was not going to be so. So, they had their fears. They wanted to safeguard their interests. The blacks wanted enough of social and economic rights, while the whites were keen to protect their privileges and property. After long negotiations, both parties agreed to a compromise. The whites agreed to the principle of majority rule and one person, one vote. They accepted some basic rights for the poor and the workers. On the other hand, the blacks agreed, and this is very important, that majority rule would not be absolute, meaning they will also see to the interest of the minorities. The property of the whites would not be touched. Could they trust each other? Because after so many incidents that had happened earlier, the only way to build and maintain trust is to write down some rules of the game. Everyone had to abide by these rules. The rules decide the rights of the citizen. They agreed on some basic rules. These rules will be supreme. No government will be able to ignore these rules. This set of basic rules is called a constitution. Every country has diverse people. People have differences of opinions and interests. Therefore, most countries need to have these basic rules, or else there will be civil war and disintegration of the country. Governments and associations, clubs, cooperative societies, and political parties must have certain basic rules. Thus, a constitution of a country is a set of written rules that are accepted by all people living together in a country. It is the supreme law of the land. Then, what does a constitution do? First, it generates a degree of trust and coordination so that people can live together. Second, it specifies how the government will be made up and who will have the power to take which decisions. Third, it lays down limits on the power of the government and what the rights of the citizens are. Fourth, it expresses the aspirations of the people about forming a good society. All countries that are democratic will have constitutions. All democratic countries will also have a written constitution.